And so Aten, distressed at his loss, created Ra, the shining fiery eye, so that Ra could shine a light into the primeval void into which his children, Shu and Tefnut, had ventured. Since the very earliest of times, man has looked up into the sky and wondered about that great mysterious ball in the sky, the sun. And so in today's episode, we're going to look at man's relationship with the sun and his veneration of the sun god. We'll go back in history to discover the true meaning of the stone circles and understand its relationship between the left-hand path and the right-hand path. So let's start our journey with the stone circles, and the one we'll use as an example will be the one that's been the most widely researched of all, that of Stonehenge. Now there's no doubt that Stonehenge was a very significant and important meeting place, but it didn't start its life back where it resides today. Most people are aware that the outer blue stones came from the far west of Wales. But what's not understood by most is that these stones weren't just mined in Wales and then taken down to create a new circle. They actually formed an existing circle. And that circle was then taken down and relocated to its present position. And this was discovered by Professor Mike Parker Pearson, who during excavations in 2017 to 2018 discovered a circle at Wine Mound in the Preseli Mountains in the west of Wales, whose profile, and in fact the footprint of at least one of the stones, matched precisely to that of one of the stones, one of the blue stones at Stonehenge. So the stones have been relocated. For what purpose, you might ask? We can only assume that this circle belonged to some tribal community. And the reason for relocation, I suspect, was to move it to a more sacred place, perhaps even the Axis Mundi. And the Axis Mundi simply means the center of the world from which everything revolves. And the reason I say this is because, well, there were clearly many more than just one circle in the country. There are many circles spread right throughout the country, still in existence today, and not just in Britain, but right throughout Europe. So what I'm alluding to here is that this circle seemed to start as a tribal circle, but at some point in time, it was either chosen or the tribe moved, but the new location of this circle was more than just a tribal circle. This circle took on national importance. That is, even if there was a concept of nationality, it took on a universal importance. Just 2 miles to the northeast of Stonehenge lies Durrington Walls. where the multitude of pig bones that were found at the site suggests that this was a place of mass gathering and feasting. But there are two other things that are of great significance within the enclosure of this site. The first being the analysis of these pig bones shows that all of these pigs were slaughtered at the same time of the year, and that was at the midwinter solstice. The second important discovery was that of another circle, a wooden circle that was found within the enclosure of Durrington Walls. And so the current consensus is that people gathered here at Durrington Walls to feast and celebrate prior to the winter solstice, perhaps even as much as a week or so prior to the solstice. Now it's thought that these two henges represented two different worlds. The Woodhenge represented the world of the living, and the Stonehenge, the world of the ancestors and the dead. Now the feasting would probably continue right throughout the midwinter's eve, but at some time prior to sundown on the midwinter's eve, the procession would begin from the world of the living Woodhenge to march along the banks up to the world of the ancestors and the dead at Stonehenge. And as the sun cycles between life and death, then so does the procession. And proceeding to the land of the dead was significant because this was the world of spirit, the world where man could interact with the ancestors and the gods. So why were these structures built as circles? Why not squares or rectangles or even triangles? Well, the circle is symbolic of the sun, for obvious reasons, its shape, but it's also symbolic of the cycle of the sun. As the sun moves through the seasons, through spring, summer and autumn, it is refreshed again at the same point at the winter solstice, and a new cycle is begun. And so the circle perfectly represents this cycle through the seasons and the cycle of life, death and rebirth. This, of course, is representative of every living thing on this planet. First it's born, it lives, and when it dies, its essence, its remains, goes back to that big cosmological melting pot, and everything is recycled so that the cycle of life can begin again. So this was the perfect symbol. It represented everything they knew about the earth. It represented the sun, which controlled the life cycle and the growing season, and it also represented the process of creation. So what happened when they got there? Well, clearly we don't know the details, we can only guess, but I suspect that at the centre there would have been some ceremony held by the priests to celebrate the return and rebirth of the sun. I think it's safe to assume that there would have been quite a bit of alcohol drunk, and yes, the Neolithic people did have alcohol in a type of beer. And of course there would have been other herbs taken as well. And this, combined with all the rhythmic banging of the drums, would have sent people into a trance-like state. And then there are a few other things that we might speculate at too. And I say this because there's a number of stories that are handed down to us through folklore that have this connection with the circle. Now, some of you may have heard of terms such as Deosil and Widdershins, and these are terms that are expressed to us through rituals of folkloric tradition. Now, most people consider the term Deosil to mean clockwise and Widdershins anti-clockwise, but their real meaning can be traced back to this circle again. And the sun and Deosil really means sunwise, and Widdershins, of course, is the opposite. It is the opposite direction to which the sun moves. And this is pretty important if you live in the southern hemisphere. Deosil, to those people in the southern hemisphere, really would mean to move anti-clockwise, and Widdershins clockwise. These terms are often seen in folk magic. But why is it that we are told that for some purposes we should move Deosil with the sun, and other purposes to move Widdershins against the sun? So the answer is that you would move Deosil in the direction of the sun for creative and positive purposes, and you move Widdershins against the sun for negative or destructive purposes. But really, it's best to think of this as Deosil for invocation and Widdershins as banishing. This concept of moving sunwise or counter-sunwise also gives rise to another terminology that you might be familiar with, and that is the terms of the left-hand path and the right-hand path. So generally speaking, somebody that follows the left-hand path is somebody that's more involved with the darker or more negative aspects. And somebody that follows the right-hand path is more involved with the creative, positive aspects. And these terms have come about as a direct relationship to the patterns involved when working with the circle. When you place the object of your desire precisely at the center of the circle, you move either sunwise or counter-sunwise, depending on your purpose. Now, in the northern hemisphere, as I've mentioned before, when you're working on the creative side, on the more positive side, then you work sunwise around the circle. And in the northern hemisphere, sunwise means clockwise. And so when you're walking around the circle in a clockwise direction, you will find that your object of desire will always be to your right-hand side. So in this pattern, you're being positive and you're being creative, and your object of desire remains on your right-hand side, and hence the term the right-hand path. And of course, the opposite when you're in a banishing pattern, where the object remains on your left side. And so these terms come down to us to mean that one that walks in an invoking pattern and working on the positive and creative side walks the right-hand path, and one who walks in a counter-clockwise direction is in a banishing pattern and works a more destructive, negative path. Now coming back to these stone circles, and this is purely speculative, but one would think that these stories and ideas that come down to us from folklore didn't come from absolutely nowhere. Now at the beginning, I specifically mentioned that these stone circles weren't just a few, but there appeared to be many, and I referred to them as tribal circles. And with so many of them still being in existence today, I think it completely reasonable to think that these tribes use these circles at various times of the year. And I think they would have been used for various purposes. So they were probably used annually at certain times of the year to ensure, for example, a bountiful harvest. And then there may be other times whereby these same stone circles would be used to banish a blight or a pestilence that's hit the village. And so I think it's possible to conjure up a picture and imagine the events that took place at these stone circles, whereby you had the priesthood of the day at the center of the circle conducting their rituals, focusing their attention on the desired outcome. Around them would be the drummers knocking out their hypnotic, rhythmic beats. And on the outside, at the circumference of the circle, would be the rest of the tribe, moving in a pattern to either invoke or banish the creative powers of the sun. So I hope you've all enjoyed today's discussion, and if you have, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already. And with that, I'll see you again in another 2 weeks on the next episode.